What if everything we knew about our world was a carefully crafted illusion, controlled by forces beyond our understanding? As humanity steps into the unknown, the truth about our existence may be far darker and more extraordinary than we could ever imagine. The storm had rolled in quickly, just as it always did on Iceland's rugged northern coast. The wind howled through the jagged mountains, whipping snow across the barren landscape. The ocean, usually a peaceful sight, was now an angry expanse of dark waves, crashing against the blackened rocks. It was on such a night that Jon, a local fisherman, found himself battling the elements on his small boat. He had been out there countless times, but tonight was different. Something in the air felt charged, unnatural. He had noticed the lights before, strange, flickering orbs high in the sky, moving erratically in ways no aircraft could. But tonight, the lights were closer, and they seemed to follow him, darting through the clouds with a precision that made his skin crawl. He was used to the Arctic silence, the kind that blankets everything and makes the smallest sound echo like a whisper. But tonight, the stillness was broken by the hum. At first he thought it was the boat's engine, but when he turned it off, the sound persisted, faint but undeniable. A high-pitched whine that seemed to come from nowhere, filling the air around him. He pulled his coat tighter and tried to dismiss the unease creeping up his spine. It was nothing, just the wind playing tricks. But as the lights grew brighter, he realized he was no longer alone. Dr. Freyja, a scientist who had spent much of her life studying the natural world, would have scoffed at Jon's tale if she had heard it then. She had always dismissed the idea of UFOs as nothing more than superstition and coincidence. But something about this place, the ancient, wind-swept landscapes, spoke to her in a way she couldn't quite explain. She had come to Iceland to study the region's unique geology, but the moment she heard of Jon's encounter, something shifted. Her skepticism, once unshakable, began to waver. It was absurd, but the idea that these lights were something otherworldly began to take root in her mind. She couldn't ignore the coincidence. The strange lights, the disappearances, the ancient stories passed down through generations of locals. Lars, a former military officer, was far from convinced that extraterrestrials were involved, but his connection to the howled, the lost warship, made him keenly aware of the unexplainable. His grandfather had been aboard the howled the night it vanished, and the mysterious events surrounding its disappearance had never left him. Lars had grown up hearing whispered stories of strange happenings before the ship's last mission, of strange lights in the sky that some believed had led the howled to its doom. Now, with Jon's account, those old stories felt far too real. The three would soon find their paths intertwined in a way none of them could have anticipated. Each one had a part of the puzzle. Jon, the witness, Dr. Freyja, the scientist searching for answers, and Lars, the man whose family had paid the price for not understanding the mystery. Together, they would have to confront the unexplainable, and in the process, they would uncover the truth that had been hidden for decades. The lights, the ship, and the whispers in the dark were not just stories. They were the beginning of a far greater mystery, one that would change everything they thought they knew about their world. The howled was a symbol of pride for Iceland, a sleek warship built during the height of World War II. Commissioned to patrol the seas around Iceland's northern coastline, the ship had become a fixture in the small naval fleet. But it was during one fateful mission, nearly 70 years ago, that the howled would disappear without a trace. No wreckage, no distress signals, and no survivors. Just a chilling silence. Lars had grown up hearing stories about the howled from his grandfather, who had been a young officer aboard the ship when it vanished. Old Captain Einar had been a man of few words, but the ones he spoke were always heavy with unspoken fears. He never told Lars exactly what had happened that night, but his eyes would grow distant, as if seeing things from a time long past. The ship was lost to the sea, Einar would say, But it wasn't the sea that took it. It was the rumors that made Lars's childhood a little more unsettling. His grandfather would occasionally mention strange lights seen from the ship's deck in the days leading up to the mission. Flickers of color in the sky that moved in ways no aircraft could. The crew had grown nervous, some believing it to be a bad omen. But Captain Einar, a man who had faced the horrors of war, had never shown fear until the night the howled vanished. Lars often wondered if his grandfather had been hiding something more than the facts. But now, as an adult, the memories of those whispered stories gnawed at him with a strange intensity. He had never shared his thoughts with anyone until now. When Joan had told him about the lights in the sky, a cold realization settled over him. The parallels between his grandfather's tales and Joan's encounter were too close to ignore. Dr. Freya, ever the skeptic, had spent weeks sifting through old naval records, trying to piece together what little remained of the howled's mission logs. Official accounts were sparse, and the details surrounding its disappearance were oddly vague. The howld had been tasked with a simple reconnaissance mission, but something had gone wrong. The ship had simply stopped communicating, and no distress signals were ever sent. What troubled Dr. Freya even more were the reports of strange electromagnetic anomalies in the area. It seemed like the howld had drifted into a zone where radio signals and communication systems failed, leaving the crew isolated just before their disappearance. The more she uncovered, the more convinced she became that there was something more to the howld's fate than a simple tragedy. She couldn't shake the thought that the ship's disappearance was not just a result of war but something far more inexplicable. The lights, the disruptions, and now, Jon's story. There were connections, hidden in the stories, in the records, fragments of something larger that no one had been brave enough to explore. Together, Lars and Freya were on the edge of something far deeper than either of them could have imagined. The missing howld was no longer just a warship lost to the sea, it was a mystery, and the lights in the sky were somehow tied to it. What had really happened to the howld, and was it tied to the strange events still unfolding around them? The answers were just beginning to emerge, but they would lead them into a world far darker and more dangerous than either could have anticipated. The report arrived on Dr. Freya's desk just after lunch, an email from the Icelandic Coast Guard with a subject line that immediately grabbed her attention. Unusual radar anomaly detected off northern coast. She scrolled through the contents with increasing unease. It seemed like an ordinary report at first, standard protocol for any maritime disturbance. But as she read on, she realized that this wasn't typical. The radar had picked up a fast-moving object at a depth that should have been impossible for any known vessel or aircraft to reach. The object had appeared out of nowhere, then disappeared as quickly as it had come. The anomaly had been brief, lasting only a few seconds, but the Coast Guard had felt it was important enough to bring it to her attention. A small part of her dismissed it. Just another glitch in the system, another malfunction or misread radar scan. But then, as she reread the details, its speed, its depth, the way it moved, something clicked. It was too similar to the accounts Jon had shared with her. The unexplained lights in the sky, the sensation of being watched. Could it be possible that this anomaly was connected to the same strange occurrences? She called Jon right away, her voice betraying her urgency. "I need you to meet me at the research center. There's something you need to see." It wasn't long before Jon and Lars arrived. Jon's expression was tight with concern, his mind already racing to connect dots he didn't yet fully understand. Lars, on the other hand, seemed guarded, as if he was trying to make sense of something too big for him to handle. "This radar anomaly, Doctor," Freya said as she pointed to the report on her computer screen. "It matches a pattern. An odd one, but a pattern all the same. I think this is connected to the lights you saw, and I think it might also be connected to the disappearance of the howled." Lars leaned over the desk, scrutinizing the radar image. His hand gripped the edge of the table. Are you saying something's down there? In the ocean? I don't know what it is, Dr. Freya admitted. But this kind of radar anomaly doesn't happen. Not like this. And it's not just the Coast Guard. I've been going through old records. There are similar disturbances, going back decades, that match this pattern. I think they're all tied together. Jon glanced from the radar screen to Dr. Freya's face, his brow furrowed. You're saying the howled was caught in something like this? I think it was, she replied quietly. And I think whatever it was, it's still out there, watching. The room fell into a heavy silence. They had all sensed that the strange lights, the lost warship, and now this anomaly, were all pieces of a much larger puzzle, but none of them had realized how tightly woven these events were. Lars rubbed his chin thoughtfully. If it's all connected, then what are we dealing with? And how do we stop it? The question hung in the air, unanswered. But Dr. Freya had already begun to suspect that whatever they were dealing with wasn't just some natural phenomenon. It was something else, something far older and far more dangerous. The more she looked into it, the more she feared they were being drawn into a mystery that reached beyond anything they had ever imagined. The true nature of the lights, the howled, and the radar anomaly was beginning to emerge, but it was much darker than they had anticipated. Jon had been out on the water again, this time with the sole purpose of clearing his head. The sea had a way of doing that for him, quiet, vast, and endless. But as the evening grew darker and the horizon swallowed the last traces of daylight, something shifted. The stillness that usually settled over the water felt thick, unnatural, like a warning in the air. He didn't want to admit it to himself, but the strange lights had been haunting him ever since that first encounter. They had come in flashes, fading in and out of his vision, bright as stars but with no clear source. He had told himself it was nothing, a trick of the eye or some natural phenomenon. But tonight, something felt different. The water was eerily calm, and as he gazed out into the dark, he saw them two small, flickering lights far off in the distance, exactly where they had been the first time. The lights weren't stationary. They moved. Slowly at first, then picking up speed as they grew closer. Jon's breath caught in his throat. His hands tightened on the wheel, his instincts screaming that he wasn't alone out here. The boat rocked slightly, and he could feel the tension build in the air, an invisible pressure that made his skin prickle. It was the feeling of being watched, cold, relentless, and overwhelming. He wasn't sure how he knew it, but the sensation was undeniable. His heart began to race as the lights drew closer, moving in tandem with his boat. For a moment, he wondered if they were simply birds or some kind of distant ship with blinding lights. But no, these didn't behave like anything he had ever seen before. The way they shifted in the sky was too smooth, too deliberate. Jon slammed his fist on the side of the boat as if to shake himself free of the rising panic. This was absurd. He had been out on these waters countless times, and yet tonight, he felt as if something was watching him. Something old, something far older than the sea itself. The lights hovered just above the water's surface now, trailing his boat with unnatural precision. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but it felt as though the moment had stretched into infinity. He could feel his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. A sudden thought broke through the fog of fear. I have to get back to shore. Just as quickly as they had appeared, the lights blinked out. Gone. The water was still. The night quiet again. Shaking, Jon grabbed the radio and called for help. But as his fingers gripped the mic, he found himself hesitating. There was no point in telling the others about this. No one would believe him. Later that night, he sat at the edge of the dock, staring into the vastness of the ocean. He had no explanation for what had happened, But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. He could feel it. It was still out there, waiting, watching. He needed answers. And he knew exactly who to go to for them. The next day, he would contact Dr. Freya and Lars. This time, he wasn't keeping it to himself. They had to know. The following morning, John met with Dr. Freya and Lars at the small cafe in the village. His face was drawn with a mixture of exhaustion and determination, the weight of his encounter still hanging heavily over him. As they sat around a dimly lit table, John shared his experience. The lights, the feeling of being watched, and the strange sense that something beyond ordinary explanation had been at play. Dr. Freya listened intently, her expression thoughtful but composed, while Lars seemed more skeptical, though the curiosity in his eyes betrayed him. "What do you think?" John asked, his voice heavy. Dr. Freya took a slow breath. "I think we're looking at something significant. What you saw isn't an isolated event. There have been reports from surrounding villages, people seeing lights in the sky, objects that perform maneuvers impossible for any known aircraft. It's happening more often than anyone realizes." Lars nodded, pushing his coffee aside. "My grandfather spoke of something similar. He never went into detail. But his diary, it might help us understand. You see, he was on the howled, the warship that disappeared, and in his notes, there are references to strange visitations before their final mission. Not many people know about that." The words hung in the air like a quiet storm, and for the first time, Dr. Freya's interest peaked beyond the scientific. She'd heard of the howled, of course. The disappearance of that warship was something that had never been solved, and it was often buried under the weight of the war's larger tragedies. But Lars's claim about visitations, strange, unexplained events was new. "Can I see it?" "Doctor?" Freya asked, her voice tinged with urgency. "I believe this might be more connected than we think." Lars didn't hesitate. He pulled a weathered leather-bound book from his bag and slid it across the table. The pages were thick with years of dust, the ink slightly faded but still legible. As Dr. Freya flipped through the pages, she found reference after reference to odd happenings, lights, unexplained sounds, strange figures on the horizon. One entry, dated the night before the howled's final voyage, stood out. A craft in the sky. No sound, no recognition. It came close, then vanished in an instant. "We're not alone out here." Her heart skipped a beat. "This is incredible. It's as if your grandfather knew something we're only starting to understand." She scanned the rest of the diary, noting the consistent references to objects in the sky, always present, always hovering, and always just out of reach. Joan's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of his own encounter with the lights, the strange behavior of the howled, and the growing web of mysteries that seemed to tie the two together. So, what does this mean? What are we dealing with? Dr. Freya closed the diary with a soft thud. "It means we need to dig deeper. This isn't just coincidence. The disappearances, the sightings, there's a connection, and I think we're standing at the edge of something bigger than we realize." The air around them felt charged with something electric. The mystery was no longer just an anomaly, it was a trail, leading them into the unknown, and Dr. Freya knew that the next step was going to take them further than any of them had ever imagined. Lars met with the elderly veteran in a small, quiet house nestled on the outskirts of the village. The man, Victor, was a former crew member of the howled, and despite his frailty, his mind remained sharp enough to remember the night that would haunt him for the rest of his life. As they sat in his living room, the scent of aged leather and tobacco filling the air, Victor looked at Lars with a mixture of wariness and resignation. "You're asking about the howled, eh?" Victor's voice was low, gravelly from years of smoking and talking about things he had hoped to forget. I haven't talked about it in years, but if you need to know, I'll tell you. Lars leaned forward, his curiosity now mingling with a deep sense of urgency. What happened that night? The night the ship disappeared? The crew. Did they see something? Anything that could explain it? Victor stared at the floor for a long moment before speaking. It wasn't a normal night. The sky was dark, the kind of black that swallows everything. We were out there, just waiting. And then it happened. The lights. He paused, as if the memory had taken hold of him once again. It started as a flicker on the horizon, just a flash at first, nothing unusual. But then it grew. Bigger, brighter. Some of the men thought it was a ship. Some thought it was an aircraft. But it wasn't like anything we'd ever seen. It moved too fast. It changed colors, too, like a pulse. First white, then blue, then red. It was as if it was alive. Victor's hands trembled as he recalled the moment. I remember one of the men. Gunnar, he went up to the bridge to get a closer look. He said it was following us. The lights just kept moving in sync with the ship. We were all on edge, unsure of what to do, but none of us could look away. The captain ordered us to get back to our posts, but no one really knew what to do. We couldn't stop staring. Lars felt a cold shiver run through him. And then what happened? The lights, they just vanished. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone, like it had never been there at all. But the real thing, the thing that still keeps me up at night, it was the way the air felt afterward. Heavy, like something was watching us. Victor's gaze turned distant, as if he could still feel that weight in the air. The ship vanished, sure, but it wasn't just the howled. It was us. We were different after that night. Some of the men, they started hearing things, whispers in the dark. And the captain, he never spoke of it again. We all agreed to forget what happened. But we knew something had taken us. Lars sat in silence, processing the weight of Victor's words. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but the truth seemed just as elusive as the lights that had led them all to this point. Something had happened out there, something no one understood. And the closer Lars and the others got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. Dr. Freya sat at the worn wooden table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she sifted through the latest batch of documents. The room was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of paper. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, but inside, the atmosphere was charged with something more elusive, an unsettling energy, as if the truth was just out of reach. Lars and John sat across from her, waiting. John shifted uncomfortably in his chair, casting occasional glances at the pile of reports. He had been skeptical from the start, but lately, even he couldn't deny that something far stranger than coincidence was at play. Still, he held on to a thread of doubt. Doctor, Freya broke the silence, her voice steady but tinged with a growing certainty. I've been thinking about the lights. The patterns aren't random, Jon. They're deliberate. She looked up at him, her eyes intense. I believe we're dealing with something more than a natural phenomenon. These lights, they're signals. Not just from an aircraft or a ship. They're too precise, too methodical. John's skepticism hardened. Signals? From who? Who would even send them? You think we're dealing with aliens? Dr. Freya leaned back, her hands clasped together. I'm not saying it's aliens. But what if these lights are a form of communication? A signal meant to be noticed. Something someone could be trying to reach us. She paused, watching the storm outside. Or something else. Something far older and far more complex than anything we've considered. Lars, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Could it be possible? Could these lights, this strange behavior, be linked to what happened to the howled? What if the ship, the crew, they were involved in something that goes beyond our understanding? John's eyes flickered with doubt. What are you suggesting, Lars? That they were taken by aliens? That the ship just vanished because of some extraterrestrial force? Lars looked down at the floor, deep in thought. I don't know, Joan. But Victor's story, and what we've seen with the lights, I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this. The howled didn't just disappear. Maybe it was part of something bigger. Maybe the crew wasn't just lost, they were taken for a reason. Doctor? Freya nodded. That's the theory I'm proposing. The warship, the lights, the strange behavior of the crew, all of it might be connected to something beyond our world. These lights could be an indicator that they were watched, observed, or even controlled. Joan's skepticism was still evident, but the weight of their words hung in the air. He looked at Lars, who seemed lost in thought, then back at Dr. Freya. So, what do we do with this? How do we prove any of it? Dr. Freya stood up, her expression resolute. We keep looking. We dig deeper into the records, the reports, and we follow the lights. Maybe they'll lead us to the truth. Jan remained silent, the storm outside raging as the storm inside him brewed with doubt. Yet a flicker of intrigue began to burn. Could it really be true? Were they on the edge of uncovering something far more extraordinary than they could have ever imagined? Dr. Freya felt a surge of excitement as she stared at the stack of dusty files she had uncovered in the dimly lit archive room. They were tucked away in a forgotten corner of the Icelandic government archives, buried beneath decades of bureaucratic red tape and forgotten history. For hours, she had sifted through old naval records, but these were different. They were marked with a classification stamp she had never seen before, a seal from the World War II era that read, Top Secret. With trembling hands, she carefully opened the first folder. Inside were documents detailing reports from Icelandic naval officers, some of whom had served in the very waters where the howled had disappeared. The documents were riddled with codes, encrypted messages, and cryptic notes, but it was the references to unexplained phenomena that drew her in. Several pages contained brief descriptions of strange lights in the sky, reports from ships that had encountered objects moving at impossible speeds. As she flipped through the papers, one line caught her eye. Incident involving unexplained vessel sightings, ongoing research, and classified naval operations in Icelandic waters. She felt a chill run down her spine. It was dated to 1942, the same year the howled disappeared. She quickly scanned the rest of the report, which hinted at an ongoing secret project that seemed to involve naval vessels and strange encounters with unknown objects. The connection was too clear to ignore. Lars and John were sitting nearby, leaning over maps and old photos, unaware of the significance of what she had found. But now, Dr. Freya couldn't contain her excitement. She quickly gathered the documents, hurriedly pushing aside the clutter on the desk, and made her way over to the men. Lars, Jon, you need to see this, she said, her voice tight with urgency. John looked up, puzzled, as Dr. Freya spread the documents before them. Lars was the first to speak. What is it? These documents, she began, taking a deep breath. They refer to a naval project that was classified during the war. It talks about unexplained phenomena, lights in the sky, strange objects interacting with naval vessels. The howled might have been involved in this project, maybe even witnessed these phenomena firsthand. Lars leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. A project? You think they were testing something? On the howled? Dr. Freya nodded slowly. It's possible. These reports are from the same time period. There's a mention of Icelandic naval vessels being used in what looks like a controlled experiment involving UFOs. The howled might have been one of those vessels, sent to investigate or even engage with whatever these lights were. John, still skeptical but intrigued, scanned the documents. "You think the ship's disappearance could be tied to this experiment?" "There's no doubt," Dr. Freya replied. "The Hawkerl wasn't just a casualty of war. It might have been caught in something much bigger, something involving forces beyond what we understand." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of their discovery. For the first time, all the strange sightings, the inexplicable behavior of the crew, and the missing warship seemed to fit into a terrifyingly logical puzzle. Something had happened out there in those waters, and it wasn't just an accident. The truth was much darker and more complicated than they could have ever imagined. The more they dug into the mystery, the more the strange occurrences seemed to multiply. As word of their investigation spread, locals began approaching John and Lars with their own stories. At first, the stories were dismissed as overactive imaginations fueled by fear of the unknown. But soon, it became undeniable reports of UFO sightings around Iceland were increasing, and they all pointed to the same strange phenomena: lights in the sky, moving in ways that no human-made aircraft could manage, appearing without warning and vanishing into the night. Dr. Freya scoured the records, finding corroborated reports from various villages dotting the coast. Each village had its own account of sightings, some just a flash of light, others describing objects hovering for minutes at a time, only to shoot off at impossible speeds. The locals spoke of the lights with a mixture of awe and unease, some claiming to have heard low-frequency hums accompanying their appearance, others recalling an inexplicable sense of dread, as though they were being watched by something far beyond their understanding. The trio's next step was to visit the location where the Hawkerl had been last seen. Lars had been hesitant at first, as the memories of his grandfather's stories still haunted him. But something had pushed him forward, a need to understand, to make sense of it all. He and Joan stood at the cliffs overlooking the waters where the Hawkerl had vanished. The wind howled as it always did, and the sea churned below them. But there was an odd stillness in the air that made everything feel wrong. It was as if the land itself remembered. Joan ran his fingers through the cold earth, disturbed by the sharp chill that seemed to emanate from beneath the surface. There were no obvious signs of disturbance, but Lars couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The ground felt unnaturally firm, and as he stepped closer to the edge of the cliff, he noticed something strange: scratches, deep gouges, running through the rock face. They weren't natural. No storm, no crash, no erosion could have caused them. They were methodical, precise, almost as though something had scraped the earth with force. Lars crouched, inspecting the marks closely. He could feel the weight of their significance pressing down on him, a chilling sense that the past had left something behind that couldn't be erased. The strange lights in the sky were no longer just stories. They were connected to the land, to the sea, and now, to the very earth beneath their feet. "It's as if the land remembers," Lars murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Freya joined them, her eyes scanning the same marks. "It does," she said, her tone thoughtful. "This is where the Hawkerl disappeared. There's more to this place than just the ship's wreckage. Whatever happened here, it left its mark." The hairs on the back of Jan's neck stood up, the air heavy with the unsolved mystery. They weren't just investigating the disappearance of a ship anymore. They were uncovering something far more terrifying, something that the land itself had held onto, waiting for someone to finally notice. The more they learned, the stranger the pieces of the puzzle became. The night the Hawkerl vanished had always been shrouded in mystery, but as Dr. Freya sifted through old accounts and testimony, the details began to align in a way that was impossible to ignore. Eyewitnesses, few though they were, spoke of the ship being surrounded by strange lights, bright and pulsating, hovering near the vessel before it simply disappeared from view. The crew had vanished without a trace, as though swallowed by the night itself. It was Lars who first heard the account that seemed to piece everything together. An elderly fisherman, his hands gnarled with age, recalled seeing the howled from a distance that fateful night. He remembered the lights, yes, but what he described next sent a cold shiver down Lars's spine. The lights weren't just hovering. They were moving in patterns, deliberately circling the ship as if it were the focus of some invisible force. Then, in an instant, the howled was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Lars couldn't shake the haunting image of that empty sea. The lights now gone, the ship no longer in sight. Could it have been a miscommunication? He asked, trying to make sense of the madness. A trick of the light, a storm, something natural? Dr. Freya, her brow furrowed as she examined the details of the story, didn't seem to think so. It's not a coincidence. The reports are too consistent, she said softly, her voice filled with conviction. I think it's tied to what's been happening recently. The lights, the disappearances, the ship, and the crew. I believe they were taken. Her voice wavered as the implication set in. This is bigger than just one ship. It's an extraterrestrial experiment. The lights aren't random. They're part of something planned, something we don't understand. Lars stared at her, disbelief written across his face. You think the crew was abducted? By aliens? The idea felt too wild, too far-fetched. But as the days passed, it became harder for Lars to deny the coincidences. The lights had been around for decades, hovering near the same waters, just like the night the howled vanished. Dr. Freya's theory, however improbable, made more sense with each passing day. There had been stories of strange encounters with UFOs, of people vanishing under odd circumstances, of inexplicable phenomena on that stretch of coastline. I don't know what to believe anymore, Lars muttered under his breath. But there's something about all of this that's not just a coincidence. The team was now tied to a story far bigger than any of them had anticipated. The more they uncovered, the more it seemed like the howld's disappearance wasn't just an accident. It was part of a larger mystery, one that stretched back decades, and perhaps even centuries. Whatever had happened to the howled and its crew, it wasn't over. And the lights in the sky, the strange events on the land, were all part of the same unsettling puzzle. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, in the form of a forgotten radio transmission that had been buried in the depths of the Icelandic Coast Guard's archives. Dr. Freya had spent days combing through old files, when she stumbled upon it, a short but chilling snippet from the howld's final moments. The transmission had been recorded just hours before the ship vanished without a trace, a garbled message that had long been dismissed as a technical glitch. But as she listened, the distortion on the recording didn't feel random. The static seemed to pulse, rising and falling with an eerie rhythm, as though something was trying to break through. It was the muffled voices that unnerved her most, barely audible but unmistakable. They weren't human, and they weren't static. Dr. Freya played the recording again, slowing it down this time, her eyes narrowing with disbelief. There were words hidden in the noise, cryptic, unintelligible phrases, but the tone was unmistakably otherworldly. Lars and Joan crowded around her, their faces reflecting the same mixture of curiosity and dread. What is that? Lars whispered, almost afraid to ask. I'm not sure, Dr. Freya replied, her voice quiet. But it's not like anything I've ever heard before. These sound like voices, and they're not from any earthly source. The realization hung heavy in the air. Was it possible the crew had been communicating with something from beyond the stars? The transmission left more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. The lights, the ship's disappearance, and now these voices. It was all connected. But how? As the team sat in stunned silence, Jon, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. I had another encounter, he said softly. His tone was measured, but his eyes betrayed the unease he felt. The lights, they were out there again, just like before. I was on the boat, out in the same waters. And this time, I managed to get something on camera. He pulled out his phone, showing them the footage. The screen flickered with a grainy image of the same pulsating lights from before. They hovered in the distance, just above the water, their movements as erratic as ever. But there was something new. A distortion in the footage, a strange interference, just like the sound on the transmission. It's like they knew I was filming, Jon said, his voice barely above a whisper. They moved closer, almost as if they were watching me. The hairs on the back of Lars's neck stood up. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. The lights were no longer an isolated phenomenon. They were part of something much larger, something that tied back to the howled's disappearance. We're getting closer, Doctor, Freya said, her voice steady but filled with a new sense of urgency. This isn't just about strange lights in the sky. The howld, its crew. They were part of something much bigger. And I think we're starting to understand what that is. Jon's footage, the transmission, the voices, it all pointed in one direction. They were on the cusp of uncovering a secret that had been buried for decades. And it was only a matter of time before the truth finally came to light. The investigation had taken them to the remote stretch of coastline where the howld was last seen, a place that had become the epicenter of all their theories. They stood at the water's edge, the wind howling through the jagged cliffs, and the sea crashing relentlessly against the rocks below. Dr. Freya, Lars, and Jon had agreed to visit the site one last time, hoping to uncover more evidence, something that could provide the final piece of the puzzle. The sky above had already darkened, the sun dipping low beneath the horizon. As they set up their equipment, Jon's eyes kept darting nervously to the sky, the same uneasy feeling creeping up his spine that had haunted him during his earlier encounters with the lights. Lars scanned the horizon, the chill of the evening air settling deep into his bones. There was something unsettling about the silence that surrounded them. Without warning, the lights appeared. At first, they seemed distant, small flickers far out over the water. But within seconds, they surged toward them, the pulsating glow growing brighter, more intense. It was as if the lights were drawn to their presence, responding to their very movements. The air around them grew thick, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. Suddenly, Jon stumbled forward, his body seizing as if caught in an invisible grip. He fell to the ground, his eyes wide with panic, and before either Dr. Freya or Lars could reach him, everything went dark. The next thing, Lars and Dr. Freya knew they were standing over Jon, his face pale and sweaty, his breath shallow. He was conscious but disoriented, his eyes flicking rapidly as if trying to piece together what had happened. Jon, what did you see? Doctor. Freya's voice was tight with concern, but she couldn't disguise the fear in her tone. Jon's voice was shaky as he tried to speak. I don't know. It was like they were pulling me in. I couldn't move. I was on the ship, the howld. I was with the crew. They were all around me, and then it was like everything just disappeared. I couldn't see anything anymore. Just those lights, everywhere, surrounding me. It was like they were taking me. Dr. Freya exchanged a look with Lars, the pieces falling into place. Jon's account, disjointed as it was, mirrored the stories of the crew that had vanished all those years ago. Could they have been abducted, just like Jon had been? And if so, what happened to them? Were they still somewhere, lost to time, trapped in a place beyond Earth? Jon's eyes fluttered shut, his body jerking slightly as though recalling fragments of his abduction. They were not human, he whispered before his voice trailed off. Lars clenched his fists, his thoughts racing. The lights, the strange behavior, The crew's disappearance, this was no coincidence. There was a connection here, one that tied the howled's fate to something far more sinister than they had ever imagined. "We need to get back, Doctor," Freya said, her voice steady but tinged with a sense of urgency. "We need to understand what happened to you, what happened to all of them." As they helped Joan to his feet, the weight of the night's events pressed down on them. The truth was slipping further out of reach, but the closer they came to it, the more they realized that it was far darker and more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. As they sat around the small table in Dr. Freya's makeshift office, the atmosphere was heavy with unanswered questions. Joan's recollection of his abduction had only deepened the mystery, and Lars felt a gnawing sense of urgency. There was something important here, something that was slipping through their fingers with every passing moment. Dr. Freya, her brow furrowed in concentration, flipped through the pages of her notes. Her mind was racing, piecing together the fragments they had uncovered. The lights, the howled, the disappearances, it was all connected, but the thread was still too elusive to grasp fully. "I'm starting to think," she said, her voice low, "that these lights aren't just random phenomena. I believe they're part of a deliberate observation program, an extraterrestrial one." Lars didn't respond immediately. His skepticism hadn't softened, but he was beginning to wonder if there was some truth to what she was saying. He glanced at Joan, whose eyes were distant, as if he was still reliving his experience. "Joan, what exactly did you see when you were taken?" Dr. Freya asked, her voice careful. She had been asking him that same question in different forms since it happened, but now she could sense he was reaching the edge of something crucial. Jan closed his eyes, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the table. I remember a ship. Not a warship, not like the howled, but something cleaner, sleek, metallic. The walls weren't like anything I've seen, like they were made of some material that didn't belong to Earth. He shuddered, his voice trailing off. It was cold, so cold. And the lights, they were everywhere, above, around, moving, like they were watching me. And the walls seemed to change, morph. I could feel their presence, like they were alive. Lars listened intently, his own thoughts swirling. He had heard about strange phenomena, unexplained disappearances at sea, but this was something else entirely. He thought back to the stories his grandfather had told him about naval operations gone wrong, ships lost without a trace. What if these were not accidents, but someone purposefully intervening? Could the disappearances be connected to the same forces that had taken John? "I think the howled wasn't just lost," Lars finally said, his voice steady despite the confusion inside. "I think it was taken, and I think the lights, they have something to do with it. This isn't just about one ship. This has been happening for a long time. Other ships, other crews, all vanishing without a trace." Dr. Freya nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I've been thinking. These lights, they've been watching us, studying us, maybe even taking us for a reason. And if what Joan saw is true, if this is really some sort of advanced alien technology, it's unlike anything we can comprehend." Joan, now pale and withdrawn, spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "I saw them. The crew of the howled. They were there. They weren't gone. They were waiting." He paused, as if the weight of his words were too much to bear. The room fell silent. The chilling reality of what they were dealing with was beginning to sink in. Whatever had taken the howled, whatever had ensnared Joan, it wasn't just a random event. It was part of something much bigger. Something that had been watching, waiting, for decades. And now, the truth was beginning to surface. But at what cost? The night was colder than expected, with a biting wind sweeping across the desolate Icelandic terrain. The trio stood at the edge of a jagged cliff, staring down at the dark waters below. The only light came from the flickering stars above and the headlights of their truck, which barely cut through the inky blackness. Despite the chill, there was a sense of anticipation hanging in the air, a feeling that tonight they would uncover something they had been searching for. John, Dr. Freya, and Lars were far from the safety of the village now. The remote location they had chosen was known for its UFO sightings, and after weeks of strange reports and fragmented clues, they had decided to spend the night here, hoping to catch a glimpse of the lights that had haunted John's mind since his abduction. As they set up their equipment, cameras, thermal detectors, and a few simple tools for mapping the area, John's unease grew. He could feel it again, that strange pull, like an invisible force was calling to him. "There's something here," he muttered, his voice low, barely audible above the wind. Lars looked at him, concern flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean? You're not having another episode, are you?" Joan shook his head, but the sensation had intensified. It wasn't just the memory of his abduction. It was something in the air, something in the ground. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it, deep in his bones. Something was waiting for them. Dr. Freya adjusted the settings on her camera, her gaze scanning the horizon. She'd heard the stories, read the reports, but even now, after everything they'd uncovered, there was still a part of her that needed proof. "We've been here for hours," she said, "and there's been nothing." Maybe the reports were exaggerations. But then it happened. A flicker in the distance. First a small glow, barely visible against the dark sky, then growing brighter. The lights were back, moving swiftly in a pattern that didn't match anything human-made. They seemed to circle, shifting in shape, expanding and contracting like a living organism. Joan's heart raced as he watched, his breath catching in his throat. "They're here," he whispered, almost in a trance. Without thinking, he started moving toward the edge of the cliff, drawn to the lights as if they were magnetized. He barely registered Lars calling after him or Dr. Freya's frantic attempts to stop him. His steps quickened, the pull growing stronger, until he was standing at the cliff's edge, staring down into the water below. There, barely visible through the thick layers of fog that had rolled in, was something enormous beneath the surface. An unnatural formation, long and smooth, as if it had been carved or placed there deliberately. The lights danced over it, illuminating its strange, symmetrical structure. Jon's body was trembling, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming sense of recognition. He wasn't sure how or why, but he knew this was where it had all started. The abduction, the ship, the crew, everything was connected to this place. The lights weren't just guiding him, they were leading him to the truth. Lars and Dr. Freya caught up, breathless, standing beside him. They too were mesmerized by the sight, but neither of them spoke. The reality of what they were seeing had hit them all at once, and in that moment, they knew that they had crossed a threshold they could never turn back from. Something was waiting below, and it was not of this world. The discovery felt surreal, as if they were stepping into a page of a forgotten history. The formation beneath the water was more than just an anomaly. It was an unmistakable structure, hidden in the murkiness of the ocean, barely visible beneath the churning waves. The lights above seemed to pulsate in rhythm, dancing over the dark surface like an otherworldly guide. Joan, Dr. Freya, and Lars stood at the edge of the cliff, staring down, the weight of their realization slowly sinking in. "We've found it," Dr. Freya said, her voice shaky yet full of conviction. The lights above seemed to accentuate the outline of the structure below, confirming what had only been a hypothesis moments before. What they were seeing was not a natural formation, it was an engineered structure, buried in the depths, hidden from the world. Jon felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu, as though this was the moment he had been preparing for, though he couldn't explain how. It wasn't just the strange pull that had drawn him here, it was the recognition in his gut. He didn't know how, but he knew this was the place where the howled had vanished, where the crew might still be trapped, suspended in some sort of limbo. Lars was the first to speak, his voice thick with disbelief. This is insane. Could the howled still be here? Could it be trapped in whatever this is? He pointed toward the submerged structure, his hand trembling. Freyja adjusted her equipment, scanning the waters with an intensity that matched her curiosity. If the ship was taken, this might be the place. And if it is, we need to consider the possibility that the crew could still be there, maybe not in the way we imagine, but somewhere within this structure. The idea was unsettling, yet somehow it made sense. What if the crew had never truly disappeared, but had been taken for a reason? What if the howled's last mission wasn't a military operation, but something more, a collision between the unknown and the human world, leading them to this hidden base? Jon was lost in thought, his mind racing through fragments of memories he could barely hold on to. The flashes of being aboard something that wasn't a ship somewhere he could not remember but knew intimately. The lights that had followed him, the sensations of being watched, guided, and then taken. It all converged in this moment. He looked at Dr. Freyja, then Lars, both of them staring out at the dark water, as if they too felt the gravity of what was before them. Could the ship still be down there? Jon asked, his voice trembling. Dr. Freyja's gaze hardened, her scientific mind already at work, calculating, theorizing. The warship could be preserved, hidden beneath the surface. If this is part of the alien structure, perhaps it's a place of containment, a holding cell for something or someone, but there's no way to know until we go further. Lars stared at the water one last time before speaking with certainty, though tinged with apprehension. Whatever's down there, it's waiting to be discovered, and we're the ones who found it. The trio stood in silence, each lost in their thoughts, the enormity of their discovery settling in. The warship might still be out there, waiting, just beneath the surface. But how long could they ignore the question that lingered in the air? If the ship was still there, were its crew still trapped, too? The closer they dug, the more unsettling the connections became. Dr. Freyja sat hunched over the old photographs of the howled's crew, each image capturing faces frozen in time. Young men, many of them no older than 25, their smiles stiff but hopeful, their eyes betraying little of the horrors that were soon to unfold. As she flipped through the collection, something in the background of one photograph caught her eye. A series of strange, indistinct lights were visible just above the crew, as though they were partially captured in the frame by accident. It was subtle, almost dismissible, but in the context of their investigation, it felt like a sign, another piece of the puzzle. What if they weren't just lost? What if they were taken? Freyja murmured under her breath, her fingers hovering over the photo. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of information that had been scattered across the ages. The lights, the disappearances, the strange radar signals, they all pointed to something far larger than a simple naval accident. Lars, standing behind her, nodded grimly. We've been looking at this all wrong. The crew wasn't lost. They were part of something, part of a plan. His voice was quiet but filled with conviction. Jon paced the room, unable to shake the feeling that everything they were uncovering was meant to be discovered. And yet there was something deeply sinister about the patterns that were starting to form. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. People have been vanishing for centuries, lost ships, strange disappearances. But this feels orchestrated. He returned to the photographs, his eyes narrowing. He'd seen those lights before, in the footage he'd captured on his fishing boat. He wondered if they were the same lights that had followed the howled, guiding it or leading it somewhere. Dr. Freya grabbed a stack of old government reports, her face growing more intense as she sifted through the pages. She stopped abruptly at a series of names from across the world, from cases stretching as far back as the late 1800s. Each of them had been marked as missing in similar, inexplicable circumstances. There was an eerie consistency, a pattern that tied them to the howled crew in a way that couldn't be a coincidence. The dates, the locations, the nature of their disappearances, each one hinted at a deeper, more disturbing reality. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of something larger, something systematically orchestrated. "There's a connection here," she said softly, as though speaking to herself. "The howled's crew isn't the only one. All of these people gone without a trace. And the common thread, it's not just the warships or the locations. It's the lights, the same lights we've seen." Jones stopped pacing, a chilling thought creeping into his mind. Are we sure this isn't some kind of experiment? Were they taken as part of something bigger than we can imagine? The question hung heavy in the air. Could it be possible? Were these disappearances not just random, but part of an alien agenda, a carefully plotted scheme that spanned decades? What if the crew, just like the others before them, had been part of a greater plan, an experiment, an observation, or something darker still? As the weight of the revelation set in, a quiet sense of dread washed over them. They weren't simply searching for answers anymore. They were walking the edge of something far more terrifying. The crew wasn't just lost, they had been chosen. And the lights? They weren't mere coincidence. They were the key to unlocking a mystery that threatened to unravel everything they thought they knew about reality itself. Under the cover of darkness, Dr. Freya carefully examined the exterior of the government facility. It had taken weeks of planning, tracking, and deciphering cryptic references buried in declassified documents to locate this hidden repository of secrets. It wasn't just a warehouse of old files, no, it was far more than that. This place, buried deep in the Icelandic countryside, was where the truth might finally reveal itself. Her pulse quickened as she approached the unmarked entrance, hidden from the public eye. She'd heard rumors of what lay inside, whispers of classified operations, black site research into UFOs, and knowledge that had been locked away for decades. She had no doubt that the government had known more than it was letting on. What they'd seen, what they'd uncovered during the war, and how far back the alien presence went, remained a mystery she was determined to solve. Inside, the stark concrete walls echoed with silence, broken only by the occasional shuffle of a guard's boots. Dr. Freya moved quickly, slipping into an abandoned corner of the facility. She had forged the necessary credentials, bypassed the surveillance, and now, standing in the heart of the government's secret operations, she felt the weight of history closing in. Her hands trembled slightly as she scanned the dusty documents and hidden compartments, searching for something, anything, that could tie the government's covert involvement to the disappearance of the howled. It didn't take long. There, among the old intel, were declassified files that referenced a project involving the ship. She traced her finger down the faded text, a chilling realization seeping into her bones. The project didn't just involve the military's conventional operations. It was about extraterrestrial contact, about ongoing experiments. The howled's disappearance, the strange lights, the missing crew, they were all connected to a far-reaching conspiracy that spanned more than just the ocean. Jon and Lars had been right all along. The government knew about the UFO activity. They had known, not just in the past few years, but for decades. The files spoke of an operation that started in the aftermath of World War II, with ships vanishing, aircraft being intercepted, and the crew of the howled being one of many taken subjects of a larger, hidden agenda. Lars, now beside her, scanned the documents over her shoulder, his face pale with disbelief. This can't be real," he muttered, his voice hoarse. But the evidence was undeniable. His grandfather, a military officer during the war, had been involved in this operation. There were notes in the margin, hints that suggested his grandfather had known far more than he had ever let on. Had he been part of the cover-up? Lars's stomach twisted as the weight of betrayal pressed down on him. If his grandfather had been involved in keeping these secrets, what did that mean for everything he had believed? "Doctor." Freya closed the folder, her mind racing. This wasn't just about the hawkerl anymore. It was about something much larger, something that had been hidden for too long. The government's silence, the cover-ups, the secrecy, it all led to one conclusion. The truth had been buried in plain sight. And now, they had uncovered it. But the question still lingered. How far would they go to keep the rest of it hidden? The weight of what they had uncovered began to settle heavily on Dr. Freya's mind as she reviewed the reports. More and more, the strange disappearances in the region seemed to fit a disturbing pattern. At first, it had just been the crew of the hawkerl, then John's close encounter, and now, the growing list of locals who had vanished or experienced unexplained phenomena in the area. Each case seemed unrelated at first, but the more they dug, the clearer the connections became. The lights, the disappearances, and the odd sense of being watched, it all pointed to something much larger. John, once skeptical, had grown more reserved in the wake of his own encounter. His fishing expeditions, once routine, now carried the memory of that terrifying night when the lights had surrounded him. There was no denying it anymore. He had witnessed something far beyond any natural explanation. And yet, he wasn't the only one. Locals spoke in hushed tones of missing loved ones, of neighbors who had disappeared without a trace, often after seeing strange lights in the sky. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, another thread leading them deeper into the heart of the mystery. Dr. Freya's eyes traced the patterns in the records. She had spent days piecing together the data, trying to understand the significance of what had happened to these people. It became clear to her that this wasn't some isolated phenomenon. The lights, the disappearances, they were connected. And if the crew of the hawkerl had been taken by these lights, it suggested a disturbing possibility. They weren't just random abductions, but part of something far more systematic. An experiment, perhaps, one that spanned decades and involved many more people than anyone had realized. As the trio gathered around the table, the weight of their discovery pressed in on them. Lars, who had once viewed the events with skepticism, had come to a troubling realization. His grandfather's role in the operation was more than just a passive observer. He had been part of a larger conspiracy, one that stretched back to the earliest days of World War II. And now, it seemed, the government had continued to cover up the alien connection. Dr. Freya's thoughts were running at full speed. What was the purpose of these abductions? Could the technology that had been found aboard the hawkerl be connected to the advanced alien technology that had been used to take the crew? The lights, the strange, otherworldly phenomena, it all pointed toward the same conclusion. The lights were not just random occurrences. They were part of a larger plan, a coordinated effort to abduct and observe, perhaps even to study humanity itself. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Dr. Freya couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer to the ultimate truth. But with each step they took, the danger grew. There were forces at work here that they didn't fully understand, and whatever the truth was, it was far more complicated and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The team stood at the edge of the boat, staring out over the dark, churning waters, each of them feeling the weight of the mission ahead. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the surface of the ocean, but there was an unsettling stillness in the air. The hawkerl, the lost warship, had vanished decades ago without a trace, but now, with new evidence and a growing conviction that it had been taken by something beyond earthly understanding. They were about to venture into unknown waters, literally and figuratively. Dr. Freya had managed to secure access to some of the most advanced sonar equipment available, and the moment the device began to hum to life, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Lars stood with a tense jaw, the history of the howled gnawing at him. His grandfather's whispers about that night on the ship, the lights, the strange occurrences, it all seemed to converge now on this singular point in the ocean. They mapped the area methodically, tracking the coordinates of the warship's last known location. The water was thick with fog, making visibility poor, but the sonar picked up a faint disturbance beneath the surface. At first, it was subtle, a flicker in the data. Nothing more than a shadow. But as the equipment adjusted, the shape began to take form. A massive metallic object, buried deep within the seabed, barely visible but unmistakable in its outline. Dr. Freya's heart raced. The measurements were unmistakable. This was no natural formation, no shipwreck eroded over time. This was something far more structured, far more deliberate. The team's excitement was mixed with a sense of dread. Jon, who had seen more than his fair share of strange phenomena, was quiet. His mind kept drifting back to his own encounter with the lights, to the inexplicable pull he had felt toward the unknown locations they had visited. This wasn't just a wreck, they were on the cusp of uncovering something far more profound. But the questions that haunted him, questions about alien technology and extraterrestrial involvement, gnawed at him now more than ever. They sent a remote-operated vehicle down to investigate, its lights piercing through the murky depths. As it descended, the shape became clearer, revealing a hulking mass beneath the sand. Something too smooth and too symmetrical to be a typical wreck. The sonar had been right. What they had found was not just the wreck of the howled, but something that bore no resemblance to anything man-made. The object was covered in strange markings, lines and symbols that looked like nothing they had seen before. And, most disturbingly, its shape was almost too perfect. Lars, breathing heavily, clenched his fists. His grandfather had been part of this, part of the cover-up that had kept the truth hidden for so long. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. Yet, as they watched the screen flicker with the images from the deep, an unsettling truth began to settle in. What they had found wasn't just a lost warship. It was a key to a mystery that had been buried beneath the waves for decades, a key to everything they had been trying to understand. The water surrounding the team was cold, the dark depths of the ocean swallowing them whole as they descended. Dr. Freya felt the weight of the moment, a strange combination of excitement and dread gnawing at her. The sonar had shown something hidden beneath the seabed, something massive and metallic. As the ROV inched closer to the submerged object, the eerie silence of the ocean felt oppressive. The only sound the rhythmic pulse of the submersible's engines and the faint crackle of the radio in their earpieces. At first, the wreckage appeared as a dark silhouette, only barely distinguishable from the inky blackness surrounding it. But as the camera zoomed in, the shapes began to make themselves clear. This wasn't just a sunken ship, it was something far beyond human design. Sleek, smooth, almost impossibly advanced in its geometry. Dr. Freya's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the unmistakable contours of alien craft. It was unlike anything Earth's technology could have produced. Jon, ever the skeptic, felt a strange pull as they descended deeper. The lights, the same strange lights that had followed him on the sea, the same ones that had haunted him for weeks, seemed to be there with them, as though something was watching them from the darkness of the deep. The hum of the ROV's engines reverberated through the water, but it was a sound that seemed to grow quieter, as though the ocean itself was holding its breath. Then, as the submersible's lights illuminated the wreck more fully, something truly chilling became apparent. The remnants of the howled, the warship that had vanished without a trace, were intermingled with the alien technology. Metal fragments of the ship were fused with alien materials, as if the two had become one, an unholy union of man-made and otherworldly. Broken pieces of the ship's hull, twisted and scorched, lay scattered across the ocean floor, their jagged edges twisted in unnatural ways. Dr. Freya felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. The evidence was undeniable. This was no accident. The warship hadn't simply sunk. It had been taken, merged with something far beyond human understanding. She focused on the strange markings and symbols embedded in the alien craft, symbols that matched the ones found in the photographs of the howled's crew. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. These symbols weren't just random. They were part of the experiment. The crew had been part of this. They had been taken, their fates tied to this alien technology in ways they had never imagined. As they scoured the wreck, the camera caught a glimpse of something that made Dr. Freya's heart stop. The remains of the crew, just fragments, really intertwined with the alien technology. Some had been burned, others disfigured in ways that suggested not just death, but a grotesque transformation. The crew had been experimented on, their bodies altered, perhaps even merged with the alien machine. Lars's face went pale as he stared at the footage. His grandfather, a man who had always spoken of the warship with pride, had known. He had been part of the cover-up, but what his grandfather had never said was that the crew's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy. It was a dark, twisted chapter in a much larger story. The truth they had been chasing wasn't just about missing men or lost ships. It was about an experiment, a hidden agenda far darker than any of them had anticipated. And now, staring into the depths, it was clear that the team was not just uncovering history. They were standing on the precipice of a new, far more dangerous truth. The truth, when it finally unfurled before them, felt too monstrous to comprehend. Dr. Freya sat in the cramped command center, the flickering lights from the ROV's cameras casting strange shadows across her face. Her mind was racing, piecing together the fragments they had uncovered, but every connection felt like a thread pulling her deeper into an abyss. The pieces fell together, horrifyingly, inevitably. The howled's final mission, the disappearance of its crew, with the twisted fusion of alien technology, it was all part of a plan far beyond anything she had imagined. The warship and its crew had been used as subjects in a grand intergalactic experiment, an experiment to test humanity's readiness for contact. The aliens, those entities that had watched from the shadows, had decided that humanity was ready, or at least, it was time to begin the test. But something had gone wrong. Somewhere, in that thin veil between our world and theirs, the howled had become lost, stranded, abandoned in an alternate dimension where it was never meant to return. Jon sat next to Dr. Freya, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He didn't speak, but his face betrayed his disbelief. His entire life had been shaped by the sea, the stories of the howled, and the strange lights that had haunted him for so long. But this was more than a haunting. It was a deliberate act, and he had been drawn into it all, like the crew, like the ship caught in the pull of something much larger than they could have ever imagined. Lars had been quiet for hours, his eyes fixed on the screens. He hadn't said much since the last dive, since the horrific discovery of the crew's remains intermingled with the alien wreckage. But as the realization set in, his jaw clenched, his fists tightening. His grandfather had been involved in the cover-up, had known the ship's mission wasn't just military, it was part of this grand experiment. His family had been complicit in hiding the truth. "We've been playing catch-up all this time," Lars said finally, his voice tight. The howled wasn't just a ship, it was part of their plan. We were all just tests. His eyes met Dr. Freya's, his gaze dark with understanding. And now, it's clear. They never meant for any of them to come back. Dr. Freya took a breath, trying to steady herself. The implications were too vast, too overwhelming. The crew hadn't simply disappeared into the ocean, they had been taken by forces that were beyond human comprehension, trapped in a dimension where they could never return. The lights they had seen, the strange phenomena, everything pointed to the same conclusion. The howled had been part of a test, an experiment to measure humanity's response to an unknown presence. And somewhere, in the space between dimensions, it had all gone wrong. The warship, along with its crew, was lost. Lost in a place where they could never be found, where they were never meant to return. The team sat in silence, the weight of the truth settling over them like a thick fog. They had uncovered a secret that would change everything if they could even survive the knowledge. Dr. Freya sat in the dimly lit room, her eyes scanning the records in front of her. The deeper she dug, the more the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just about the howled or its crew. The ship had been a part of something far more insidious, far more expansive. The experiments had begun long before the warship's disappearance and had continued long after. The crew of the howled had been part of a much larger program, one that had stretched across decades, evolving in ways no one could have predicted. The documents she had uncovered detailed a chilling pattern. UFO sightings, strange lights in the sky, unexplained disappearances. All of it was linked to a broader abduction program. At first, it had seemed to center around the crew, but that was just the beginning. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of an ongoing effort to monitor humanity, to test and evaluate its potential. The crew of the howled had been chosen, not randomly, but as part of a calculated experiment, a test of human resilience, endurance, and susceptibility to extraterrestrial influence. Yon's voice broke the silence. So, it wasn't just the crew. We've been watched all along. Dr. Freya nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the papers in front of her. The truth was beginning to sink in, and with it came an overwhelming sense of both awe and dread. The sightings they had experienced, the lights in the sky, those were no mere accidents. They were deliberate. Every strange encounter, every disappearance, had been part of a grander design. Humanity had been watched, observed, and tested like lab rats, caught in a web woven by beings far beyond their understanding. Lars clenched his fists, his jaw tight with frustration. But why? Why do this to us? His voice was raw, strained with the weight of the knowledge. We're just pawns in their game, Doctor. Freya took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. It's not just about us, she murmured. It's about what humanity could become. They've been testing us, yes. But more than that, they've been assessing whether we are ready for what lies beyond our world. We don't understand their goals, but this is just the beginning of a much larger picture. John shifted uneasily in his chair, the weight of their discoveries pressing down on him. And we're supposed to just accept this? That we've been under surveillance, studied like animals? Dr. Freya met his gaze, her expression soft but resolute. No. We need to understand it, to learn from it. We may not have all the answers, but what we've uncovered, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Humanity has so much more to understand about alien life, about what it means to truly be a part of a cosmic order. Lars sat back in his chair, his face a mask of quiet contemplation. The morality of it all gnawed at him, but as much as he wanted to reject the idea, there was no denying the truth of their findings. The experiment wasn't over, and whatever came next, humanity was on the cusp of discovering something that would change everything. Dr. Freya sifted through the final set of documents, each one more revealing than the last. What she uncovered would shatter the team's understanding of the howled's mission. The ship's last assignment wasn't just a routine operation, it was a secretive and dangerous mission, one that had taken the crew to the farthest reaches of space. The howled had been tasked with retrieving critical data from an alien base, hidden on the far side of the moon. The mission had been carefully orchestrated by both Earth's military and the extraterrestrial forces. But something had gone terribly wrong. Jon and Lars stood in the shadows, each struggling to process the gravity of what Dr. Freya had just revealed. The data the crew was supposed to retrieve wasn't just intelligence about alien technology. It was far more than that. It was information that could alter the course of humanity's future. The aliens, it seemed, had been watching humanity's progress for decades, perhaps longer. Their plans for Earth, for humanity's role in the universe, were intricate and carefully laid out. But something went awry. According to the records, the howled's crew had made it to the moon's far side and had successfully accessed the alien base. They had gathered the data, but they had also triggered something unforeseen, something that neither the aliens nor Earth's military had anticipated. A catastrophic event occurred, one that caused the ship to disappear without a trace, leaving only fragments of a wreckage scattered across dimensions. The crew was lost, their mission incomplete. Freya leaned back in her chair, the weight of the discovery sinking in. The trajectory of both Earth's military and the aliens' plans for humanity shifted that night, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The howled's mission was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter for humanity, one that would connect us with these extraterrestrial beings. But now, we're left with the aftermath. Lars felt his chest tighten, a sense of betrayal creeping up his spine. He had always been told that the howled's disappearance was an accident, a tragic loss at sea. But now, everything had changed. The disappearance wasn't an accident, it was the result of something far bigger, something beyond human comprehension. But what happened to the data? Jon asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. The information they gathered. Where is it? Dr. Freya looked down at the documents, a faint frown crossing her face. That's the missing piece, she said. The data, whatever it contained, never made it back to Earth. It's gone, and no one knows where it went. Was it lost in the incident, or was it taken? Lars felt a shiver run down his spine. The implications were staggering. The data wasn't just a lost piece of history, it was a key to understanding everything about humanity's future. The howled's mission had been meant to open the door to a new era, but now, that door remained sealed, locked by a mystery no one had been able to unravel. And as they stood on the edge of uncovering the truth, they realized that they were only just beginning to scratch the surface of what had truly happened on that fateful mission. Lars couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching him, something hidden just beneath the surface of his memory. The vivid images started as flashes: a crew member, his face distorted by fear, a flashing light that consumed the ship, and then, nothing. But with every moment, the fragments became more real, more detailed. The scenes felt less like memories and more like echoes, as if the past was trying to break through to him. He saw himself in the middle of the howled's final moments, but it wasn't him. It was someone else, someone he didn't recognize, but whose feelings were his own. Shaking his head, Lars tried to push the visions away. But they kept coming, gripping, suffocating. The screams of the crew, the unearthly hum of something moving beneath them, and the eerie silence that followed. It was too much. Was it his mind playing tricks? Or was there something more to these memories, memories that didn't belong to him? You're not alone in this, Lars. Dr. Freya's voice cut through his thoughts. She had noticed the shift in him, the unease that had settled over him since they started uncovering the truth about the howled. We're all feeling it. Jon, too, seemed unsettled by the truth that was slowly unraveling around them. They had all felt the weight of the lost ship, but it was Lars who was the most affected. The more they dug, the more they found clues, connections, but also a growing unease. The memory fragments gnawed at him like a constant itch, and the question lingered: what happened to the crew? Were they still out there, altered, lost to some unknown force? Lars finally spoke, his voice tight. I think they came back, but not as they were. Some of them. The crew. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like part of them might be alive, somewhere. Freya looked at him, brow furrowed. She had her own suspicions, but she wasn't ready to say them out loud yet. She had spent countless hours combing through records, piecing together the timeline of the howled's disappearance, but something felt off. The mission was far from over. They had uncovered only the surface of what had really happened. The journey took them next to a forgotten island off the coast of Iceland, remote, uncharted. There, they discovered a hidden facility buried deep beneath the earth. Inside, rows of classified records lay untouched, locked away for decades. As they poured through the files, the weight of what they found sent a chill through all of them. It wasn't just about the howled anymore. It was about something larger, something far more significant than any of them had imagined. Freya's heart raced as she connected the dots, her mind racing ahead. This wasn't just about the howled, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The disappearance wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. There's something much bigger behind all of this. As the team sifted through the evidence, a terrifying realization set in. The true nature of the mission had been hidden for decades, and they were only scratching the surface of a much darker secret one that connected the warship's disappearance to a web of deceit, alien influence, and memories that may never truly be their own. The past was more alive than they had ever dared to believe. The air was thick with anticipation as the team stood before the massive structure hidden beneath the island. The shadows around them seemed to stretch unnaturally, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. They had come this far, unearthing the truth buried in forgotten files and half-formed memories, but now they stood at the precipice of something far larger than any of them had ever imagined. The lights from their torches flickered as the silence grew heavy, broken only by the distant hum of a strange energy pulsing in the ground beneath them. Dr. Freya felt the weight of the moment settle into her chest. For all the years of study, the countless theories, this was the part she had feared the most. The truth, it seemed, was a force beyond comprehension. The UFOs, the howled, the inexplicable disappearances. There was a pattern, a connection she had only begun to grasp. But the final piece was still out of reach. Until now. Joan, standing beside her, tensed as a low, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the ground. He turned to Lars, who was staring at the stone walls ahead, a look of dawning recognition on his face. This was it. This was where the warship had disappeared, where it had been taken, where everything had begun. The air shimmered, and from the depths of the chamber ahead, figures began to materialize. They were not human nor anything recognizable. Tall, angular, with eyes that shimmered like liquid silver, their presence felt both alien and familiar. The beings seemed to glide through the air, their movements fluid and deliberate, as if they had been waiting for this moment. Lars stepped forward, the weight of everything they had uncovered pressing on him. "You've been here the whole time," he said, his voice low, filled with a mixture of awe and fury. "Watching, monitoring. The howled was never an accident, was it?" One of the beings nodded, its voice echoing in their minds, bypassing language entirely. The warship was never lost. It was part of an agreement, an experiment. The crew was selected to test humanity's readiness for the next stage of evolution. You are the key to breaking the contract. Freya's heart raced as she pieced the fragments together. "You've been orchestrating this from the beginning," she whispered. "The disappearances, the warship's mission, the abductions, they were all part of a galactic contract we never agreed to. The being's eyes glowed brighter. Not all contracts are written in words. Some are forged in the fabric of the universe itself. Your species is now at a crossroads, and the choices you make will decide whether you ascend or remain stagnant. The warship's mission was a signal. You, the ones who have uncovered the truth, are the ones who will break the contract. Tension crackled in the air, a quiet understanding passing between the team. They had unearthed the remnants of a past none of them were prepared for. But now, standing before these beings, they understood. The fate of Earth, of humanity, rested in their hands. The warship was not just a vessel lost to time. It was a pivotal moment in a much larger galactic drama. The stakes were no longer about uncovering the truth, they were about shaping the future of both worlds. As the beings faded back into the shadows, leaving only the hum of their presence behind, Freya turned to Lars and Joan, their faces grim. They had been thrust into something far beyond their comprehension, and now, the weight of their choices would determine the course of history. The truth had been uncovered, but what would they do with it? The team sat in silence as they processed the information, each piece of the puzzle falling into place with an unsettling finality. The secluded cabin was their refuge, the walls holding the weight of their revelations. Outside, the Icelandic night stretched endlessly, the wind howling against the windows like a ghost seeking entry. Inside, it was different. The room felt heavier, as if the very air was filled with a secret that was too vast to comprehend. Sitting across from them was a man whose presence seemed as worn and weathered as the knowledge he carried. His name was Jonas, a former abductee whose life had been shaped by experiences that few could begin to understand. His eyes, tired and distant, flickered with memories that seemed to haunt him more than they should. He had been one of the lucky ones, if one could call it that, they allowed to return to Earth after his abduction. But he had never truly left the place where they took him. I was part of a crew, Jonas began, his voice barely above a whisper, the weight of his words pressing into the room. A similar crew, like the howled. We were out at sea, just like them. It happened so fast. 1 minute, we were on patrol. The next, we were in a place we didn't belong. The team leaned forward, their attention fixed on him as he spoke. His face was drawn with the burden of years spent carrying this knowledge. His hands trembled slightly, but he steadied himself as he continued. They take you, and you're not just gone. You're part of something, a program, a project, something that's been happening for as long as humanity's been aware of the sky above. You think you're the first? No. You've been watched, monitored, observed for far longer than you realize. Lars looked at Freya, his expression a mixture of disbelief and understanding. So, the warship, the howled. It wasn't just an accident? Jonas shook his head. No. It was always part of the plan. The disappearances, the sightings, they're all connected. The ships, the lights in the sky, the people who vanish without a trace, it's all been happening for decades. The warship was nothing more than another experiment in a long line of tests. Humanity is being shaped, watched, prepared for something they have no idea is coming. Freya's mind raced. She had long suspected that what they were uncovering was not an isolated event but part of something much larger. But hearing it from someone who had lived it made the truth undeniable. You're saying that the howled and its crew were taken for a reason? She asked, her voice steady but carrying the weight of an unspoken fear. Jonas met her gaze, his eyes filled with an unspoken warning. Not just the howled. All of them. All the missing ships. The people who vanish. The UFOs, they're part of an ongoing program. A thread that's been running through human history, shaping it, controlling it. And the worst part? The worst part is that the program isn't over. Not by a long shot. The room seemed to close in on them, the walls pressing against them as the truth of his words settled like a stone in their stomachs. They had thought the investigation was reaching its conclusion, but in reality, it was only just beginning. The events they had uncovered were part of something far greater, an ongoing situation that was yet to fully unfold. Jonas leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant once more. You think you're the only ones who've discovered the truth? You're just the latest. And I'm sorry to say, but you're about to find out the hard way that this is just the beginning. The weight of the truth pressed down on them as the team stood at the threshold of the unknown. Everything they had uncovered, the disappearances, the sightings, the alien technology, had led them to this point, where the final pieces of the puzzle lay waiting. The truth was far more complicated than they could have imagined. The howled had not simply vanished into the ocean. It had uncovered something the alien beings had been desperate to keep hidden. And now, standing on the edge of revelation, they were about to face the full extent of that secret. The air around them seemed to thrum with an energy that was at once alien and familiar, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The team had tracked the signal to a hidden location deep beneath the surface of the sea, where the wreckage of the howled and the alien craft had converged. It was here that they would confront the beings who had watched humanity for so long, and whose experiments had shaped the course of history. Dr. Freya stood in front of the others, her gaze unwavering as she processed the enormity of the situation. It's not just about the howled, she said softly, the weight of her words hanging in the air. They've been manipulating us all along. The howled uncovered something they weren't ready to reveal. That's why it had to disappear. Lars, his mind still trying to grasp the full extent of the conspiracy, clenched his fists. So, everything, the disappearances, the UFO sightings, it was all part of their plan? Jon nodded grimly. Yes. Humanity has been their experiment for generations. They've been monitoring us, shaping us, pushing us towards something they're waiting for. The howled found something that threatened that plan. The distant hum of the alien craft reverberated through the chamber as the team descended further into the heart of the hidden base. The presence of the beings was palpable now, a force that seemed to envelop them, watching with cold, calculating eyes. They had been silent until now, but Freya knew they were aware of the team's presence. The beings would not allow their secrets to be revealed without a fight. Suddenly, a sharp, alien voice broke the silence. You should not have come. The team tensed as the alien beings materialized in front of them, their forms shimmering like smoke but solidifying into shapes that were both human and otherworldly. Their eyes glowed with an intelligence far beyond anything human beings could comprehend. They had been watching, controlling, manipulating for centuries. We never wanted you to discover the truth, the voice echoed, as though coming from all directions at once. A battle erupted then, not just of physical confrontation, but of wills. The team fought back with every ounce of strength they had, refusing to let humanity remain a pawn in an alien game. As the alien beings unleashed their power, the team pushed forward, determined to prevent the manipulation from continuing any longer. Dr. Freya's mind raced, analyzing every move, every shift in energy. The final piece of the puzzle was now in place. The howled had been the key to understanding the aliens' grand plan, but it was also the tool for humanity's liberation. They had uncovered the truth, and now it was time to stop the experiment once and for all. The stakes had never been higher, but the team was ready. The awakening had begun. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the alien technology surrounding them. Dr. Freya, Jon, and Lars stood together, their faces pale with the weight of what they had uncovered. Everything they had suspected, everything they had fought for, was now laid bare before them. The final truth was both terrifying and illuminating. Earth was not the isolated, independent planet they had once thought it to be. It was a part of something much larger, much older, an intergalactic experiment that stretched far beyond human comprehension. the disappearance of the howled had been no accident. The ship, its crew, and the unexplained phenomena surrounding them had all been a part of a meticulously orchestrated plan by alien forces who had been watching humanity for eons. The howled's final mission had been intended to unlock the next phase of the experiment, but something had gone wrong. The crew had discovered something they were never meant to find, something that would have shattered the carefully constructed illusion the aliens had built around Earth. Jan stared at the ruins of the howled, the remnants of its once proud form now fused with alien technology. The ship had been a vessel not just for war, but for exploration, discovery, and ultimately, the unraveling of a much darker truth. He had never imagined this. He had been a fisherman, a skeptic of the strange lights in the sky. But now, he stood on the edge of the world's greatest revelation. Earth was not a solitary planet in the vast expanse of space. It was a living, evolving subject in an experiment that spanned across galaxies. Dr. Freya's voice broke the silence. They've been planning this for so long. The howled was just the beginning. Earth has been part of a larger, intergalactic experiment long before humanity even existed. The alien forces that watched us, guided us, manipulated us, they were always here, pulling the strings. Lars shook his head in disbelief. But why? Why would they do this to us? Why use us as pawns in their experiment? They see us as part of a larger puzzle, Freya answered softly. Humanity's evolution, its potential, it's all part of their research. They've been guiding our development, watching us grow. The howled's disappearance was the key to understanding the next step in their plan. The implications of it all were staggering. The entire history of humanity, the wars, the advances, the strange occurrences, they had all been part of a controlled experiment. And now, the world was on the brink of learning the truth. Dr. Freya, Jon, and Lars knew that what they had uncovered could change everything. It could shatter the foundations of human history and reality itself. But there was no going back now. The truth had been revealed, and there was only one thing left to do: share it with the world. They had to prepare for the consequences, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The moment of revelation was upon them, and they stood at the precipice of a new chapter in Earth's existence. Dr. Freya stood before the gathered assembly of world leaders, scientists, and journalists, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. For years, she had worked in the shadows, piecing together fragments of truth, chasing elusive clues that always seemed just out of reach. Now, the moment had come to unveil it all. The truth she had uncovered was far beyond anything she could have imagined when she first began her research. Earth, humanity, everything they thought they knew had been part of an intergalactic experiment for centuries. As she looked out over the sea of expectant faces, her heart raced. This was the culmination of everything she had fought for, and yet, the implications were so vast, so profound, that it felt like the ground beneath her was shifting. The news she was about to present would change everything. No longer could humanity cling to the illusion of isolation. The aliens who had been manipulating their progress, guiding their development, and observing their every move, were real. They had been among them all along, pulling strings and orchestrating events from the shadows. The first few moments were filled with an uneasy silence. Freya began to speak, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. She presented the evidence, the data they had gathered, the pictures, the transmissions, and the scientific anomalies they had pieced together over the course of their investigation. As she spoke, the truth hung in the air, thick and undeniable. The howled, the warship that had vanished into the unknown, was not just lost, it had uncovered the true nature of the experiment. Humanity had been a subject of study, a part of a grand galactic plan that stretched far beyond Earth's atmosphere. The room was in chaos. Whispers rose from every corner, a murmur of disbelief and fear. World leaders, once calm and composed, shifted uneasily in their seats. Some remained silent, their faces pale with the weight of the revelation. Others demanded answers, their voices rising in protest. How could this be true? Were their entire lives built on lies? Dr. Freya's voice cut through the din, her words firm and resolute. It is true. The howled was not lost by accident. Its disappearance was part of a larger scheme. We are not alone in the universe, and we never have been. The press exploded with questions, and the media outlets broadcast her words to every corner of the globe. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People across the world watched in stunned silence as their beliefs about reality crumbled. Governments scrambled to respond, some in anger, others in fear. Militaries prepared for an unknown future, uncertain of what they had just learned. The civilian population was divided. Some rejoiced at the truth, eager to embrace a new reality, while others recoiled in fear and confusion. What did this mean for their place in the universe? Could they trust their governments? How would they continue with their lives knowing they had been pawns in an intergalactic experiment? For Dr. Freya, Joan, and Lars, the truth had finally been unleashed, but they knew the battle was far from over. The great reveal had changed everything, and the world was only beginning to reckon with the truth they had been forced to confront. The world was in the midst of transformation. What had once been confined to the realms of science fiction speculation, myths, and distant dreams was now undeniable reality. Humanity had been forced to confront the vastness of the universe, the truth of their place in it, and the shocking realization that they were not alone. The existence of extraterrestrial life was no longer a subject of debate, nor was it a distant possibility. It was now an undeniable fact, and the ripple effects were spreading through every corner of human society. Dr. Freya, Jon, and Lars found themselves at the heart of a new era. What began as an investigation into a mysterious warship's disappearance had evolved into a global reckoning. The truth about the extraterrestrial presence that had shaped human history for centuries was out, and it was reshaping everything. In cities across the world, people debated, questioned, and pondered the new reality. Governments scrambled to reassess their strategies. Military forces stood on high alert, and scientific communities were buzzing with excitement and dread. The human race had come face to face with the cosmos, and it was no longer just a matter of curiosity. It was survival, adaptation, and cooperation. In a room behind closed doors, the world leaders convened in urgent meetings, their conversations now revolving around the one thing that could no longer be ignored: a future where Earth's relationship with extraterrestrial beings would need to be carefully managed. The power dynamics had shifted overnight, and humanity's role in the larger galactic ecosystem was now a key factor in every decision made. With the confirmation that the beings who had been guiding, studying, and at times manipulating Earth's development had always been watching, questions about control, collaboration, and security became the focal point. The proposed solution, one that was discussed in hushed tones during private summits, was a treaty, a formal agreement between Earth and the extraterrestrials. The idea was not without its challenges. How could humanity trust the very beings who had been operating in secrecy for so long? Was the prospect of peace possible, or was it an illusion designed to maintain control? And what would this treaty mean for Earth's sovereignty and its future? Freya, Jon, and Lars watched from the sidelines as the political world adapted to the truth. They understood the weight of what had been uncovered, but they also knew the path ahead was unclear. The extraterrestrials' motives remained enigmatic. Had they been protecting humanity, experimenting with it, or preparing it for something larger? As the days passed, a palpable tension filled the air. The treaty was not yet finalized, but the conversation had begun. World leaders were beginning to negotiate, laying the groundwork for a new chapter in human history. But for Freya, Jon, and Lars, It was clear that this was just the beginning. The new era they had uncovered was one that would redefine everything, and as humanity stood at the edge of the unknown, the question lingered. Would they be ready to embrace their place in a much larger universe? Or would the weight of the truth be too much to bear? The world was bracing itself. A final countdown had begun, one that would see humanity venture into the unknown with a purpose far greater than anything they had faced before. The mission to the moon, long anticipated and speculated upon, had now taken on a new urgency. It was no longer just about exploration or scientific curiosity. It was about confronting the alien forces that had manipulated Earth for centuries, forces that had shaped its history, its wars, and its very existence. This mission would decide the fate of humanity. Dr. Freya, Joan, and Lars found themselves at the heart of the mission. They had spent months, even years, piecing together the truth. From the mysterious disappearance of the howled to the hidden alien agenda, every discovery had brought them closer to the moon's dark secret. Now, they stood on the precipice of a final confrontation. A confrontation that would either free Earth from the unseen hands guiding it, or seal its fate forever. The mission itself was a monumental undertaking. Cutting-edge technology and unprecedented coordination between nations had made it possible. Yet, for all the advanced preparations, the uncertainty lingered. There was no way to predict what they would find on the lunar surface, or what might happen once they reached the alien base hidden there. For years, the moon had been a place of mystery, its far side home to secrets beyond imagination. Now, humanity would finally come face to face with whatever or whoever had been hiding in its shadows. Freya's mind raced with a mixture of excitement and dread. The years of research, the long nights spent deciphering alien transmissions, and the whispered warnings from those who had gone before them had all led to this moment. They had uncovered the truth about the alien presence, but they had yet to fully understand its scope. What were the aliens truly after? Why had they left Earth on the brink of discovery, only to re-enter their lives now? And, most importantly, what kind of confrontation awaited them on the moon? Jan, the ever-pragmatic fisherman turned investigator, felt the weight of the mission's significance. He had been a part of something far bigger than he could have ever imagined when he first spotted those strange lights over the Icelandic waters. Now, he was about to face the truth about the beings that had haunted his thoughts for so long. He knew the risks, the dangers that lay ahead, but he also understood something deeper. Humanity's survival was not just about defeating the aliens. It was about reclaiming their agency, their future. Lars, with his military experience, had come to terms with the realities of war, but nothing could prepare him for what lay ahead. The idea that humanity had been manipulated by an extraterrestrial force, that their history had been shaped by unseen hands, was a bitter pill to swallow. But he knew this was their last chance to free Earth from the chains of the unknown. As the countdown continued, the team prepared. They trained, they planned, and they tried to prepare themselves for the confrontation of a lifetime. But deep down, they knew that this journey would change everything, not just for them, but for all of humanity. The time had come to face the truth head-on, to go to the moon and discover what had been hidden there for so long. The mission was a success, but the revelations it brought were far beyond anything the team had anticipated. Dr. Freya, Joan, and Lars stood in the heart of the alien base on the moon, surrounded by technology that defied all understanding. The walls seemed alive with strange markings and intricate designs, pulsating with a quiet energy. As they navigated deeper into the complex, it became clear that they had uncovered the final secrets of the howled and the alien agenda. The ship, its crew, and the missing pieces of humanity's past all converged here. For years, they had speculated about the howled's disappearance, the alien presence that had stalked Earth, and the mystery of the UFO sightings. Now, standing within the walls of the base, It all made sense. The howled had been the catalyst, the key that unlocked a broader understanding of the aliens' plans that had been centuries in the making. The ship had stumbled upon a force far greater than any of them could have imagined, and in doing so, it had inadvertently revealed the truth. Earth was part of a larger cosmic experiment. The alien beings who had been orchestrating events from the shadows had been observing humanity for millennia, testing its readiness for contact, and shaping its course without interference. The team's hearts pounded as they connected the dots, piecing together fragments of information from alien databases, cryptic messages left behind, and the knowledge they had acquired over their investigation. It was clear that the aliens had been preparing humanity for something monumental, but the mission had taken a turn they hadn't predicted. The failure of the experiment, the loss of the howled, and the sudden re-emergence of extraterrestrial influence meant that humanity was now on the brink of a new phase of its existence. As they explored further, the weight of what they had discovered settled in. The truth they had sought for so long wasn't just about the howled or the abductions. It was about humanity's place in the cosmos. The warship's disappearance had been the tipping point, the moment when everything shifted. The aliens had been preparing for a new chapter in human history, one where Earth was no longer in the dark, where humanity would take control of its own destiny. The mysteries of Iceland, the warship, and the UFOs had finally been unraveled, but they understood now that this was only the beginning. Humanity was no longer a passive participant in the cosmic narrative. It was about to step into the larger story. The journey they had begun was not just about finding answers, it was about forging a future in a universe filled with unimaginable possibilities. As the team stood there, gazing at the alien technology surrounding them, they knew that their mission had ended, but the true journey was only just beginning. The final secrets of the howled had been uncovered, and the mysteries of the cosmos were waiting to be explored. The universe had opened its doors, and humanity was ready to walk through them.